Hi friends, my name's host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Famous People and a real live grown-up adult making his way back home after doing some business in Los Angeles. I decided I wanted to make a car video in which I muse about various topics, but I've also decided I wanted to make a video about cognitive functions, and I guess I'm going to kind of mix the two together. I'm going to start by referencing an event that just happened to me. So, there was a guy, this is 4 lanes here. There's a guy in the fast lane who's going kind of slow. There was me in the lane next to the guy in the fast lane who was going faster than that guy, but was not caught up to him. Then there was a guy in the fast lane who was going faster than me, coming up on the guy in the fast lane who was going slow. So I saw this reality coming about, and I took action to make it easier on everybody. I got over knowing he'd get over a lane and pass the guy on the right. But then the guy in the fast lane, he got over to the right to let that guy go by. So that guy didn't need to get over anymore. So I started to go over again, like to my old lane. But what I hadn't anticipated was that, of course, now the slow car's in my lane. I need to be in the third lane to get past him, and so I went back into the third lane. So I started asking myself after that occurred, what does this mean in a cognitive function frame of reference? What happened there? Well, I'd say what happened there was SI dictating what I was doing, because I had in my experience the reality that I imagined, I guess, of me getting over, the fast guy getting over, and the slow guy staying where he was. So I had that plan, right? And when I ceased to need to get over to let the fast guy by, I nevertheless, I acted as though, well then, because my original need was to let that guy get past the slow guy, and I no longer have the need to do that, I can just get back in my regular lane. That's unconscious, introverted intuition, probably. My guess there. I'm not entirely sure, but that says, oh wait, no, this guy's now in front of you and it's going slow, so you have to get back over to the third lane. You could call it, again, I guess, some sort of introverted sensing itself, saying, well, I now observe that I'm going to have a problem in this lane. But the recognition that you're going to have a problem before you actually have it, that makes it NI. So I think that event was representative of somebody with conscious SI and unconscious NI. Does that mean necessarily that somebody who's an NI user would stay in that third lane without trying to get back in the second lane, because they would intuit right away that the person in the second lane will now hold them up? The answer is, I don't know. I'm not sure, but that's what I'm theorizing or hypothesizing or something. That's what I'm positing here. But I think a lot about cognitive functions, not so much about the specifics of them anymore, as I feel like I've got them understood pretty well, by and large anyway, but rather the challenge we face getting information to the world about cognitive functions that the world's going to take seriously. And the reason we face this challenge is, of course, because in the status quo, nobody should take seriously what anybody is presenting, really, except for defensible typology, for a myriad of reasons. But number one, because nobody's being rigorous about anything. That includes me. I'm not rigorously keeping data sets and whatnot, but what I'm doing is explaining things in a way that actually makes sense and that awaits any preferable explanation or any definitive evidence that somehow falsifies this explanation. And it's a powerful explanation because it will allow us, if we choose to utilize it, to recognize the dispute between person A and person B is not really about the thing itself that's being argued about, but rather it's a conflict of implicit values stemming from a person's attentional configuration. So, for example, I have extroverted intuition as a dominant function, introverted thinking as a tool function, and since I have those functions as my 1-2, I've also got extroverted feeling in the third slot. It means that I uphold novelty, originality, but most of all, putting information, talking, and presenting my talkings to people as an absolute value. But I also uphold as an absolute value other things, other expressions of words that I think have either insight or funny or whatever as inherently a good thing. So that's why I'm always YouTubing, right? I don't need to have a good reason to YouTube. It's how I exercise my dominant nature. Of course, that's a good thing. How could it be bad for me to be me? Right? Well, again, I use TI, introverted thinking, logic as an instrumental value, but it's going to appear a lot of times as an absolute value out in the world because it's my primary tool that I use to determine things. And if people are engaging with me in a way that disallows me from parsing in a TI way, then it's going to make me frustrated. Generally, I try not to parse in a logical or TI way stuff that's more appropriately parsed by one's personal feelings. But, you know, the thing is, people unavoidably, reflexively, they use their tool function for all manner of things, even when it's not appropriately called for. If I'm talking about something, a matter of public policy, and you put yourselves in the shoes of the person who is impacted by this and say, but think of how they'll feel. Well, you could say, look, that's part of a larger impact calculus that we might do, but it's an immeasurable impact, and you don't really know how that person's going to feel. So, let's get rid of the Department of Education. Everybody says, no, or yes. A FI person might say, but just think how you feel if you were the person working at the Department of Education. And I would say, well, that's actually not relevant to whether or not they should be hired or fired. It's an unfortunate reality that, let's say there were people who ought to be fired because we don't need that job, or it's inappropriate for the federal government to do it or something. It's too bad. It's not their fault that they got hired for a job that should never have existed in the first place. But we have to remedy it at some point, and somebody's going to incur the cost of that in terms of losing a job, disruption of life, and so forth. Otherwise, it just persists forever, Just like I've been waiting a long time to get my teeth fixed, knowing that when I do get them fixed, it's going to cost a lot, it's going to be some downtime for me, and I'm sure my mouth is going to hurt, etc., etc. It's kind of a big operation, but at some point I have to actually get to it. I have to actually incur the harms of horrible operation, long recovery time, maybe, I don't know, but a significant disruption to my normal life, right? It's better to get it done sooner than later, because then you have more return on investment, longer time to be alive with your teeth fixed. Anyhow, pause. So the thing is, people might not fully embrace the idea of cognitive functions, but I think it's maybe an easier sell to point out that there are 8 values that comprise the totality of human values, and they can be, each of them can be valued instrumentally or absolutely. So the values are novelty, impact, that's N-E-S-E, relevance, N-I, experience, S-I, efficiency, T-E, harmony, F-E, fairness, logic, validity, T-I, and lastly, authenticity and or something like that. The individual's preciousness. Those 8 values do in fact represent a comprehensive taxonomy of all the values that come into dispute with one another in human discourse. So if I say, well, here's an explanation of what's correct about human consciousness, ontology, etc., which I am making that claim, somebody might ask the question, well, how is this useful? And I would answer, its use is that it correctly explains things so that you can correctly understand things. It doesn't need to be then utilized in some other fashion, because relevance, the singular correct truth and most relevant powerful notion, in this case, that human personality can meaningfully and correctly be divided into 16 personality types based on permutations of intentional manners that can go together. So, I'm making that claim, and yet I'm not explaining what you're supposed to do with it. I'm not saying you can use this to determine someone's job, or you can use this to I'm saying if you want to understand human cognition correctly, you need this toolbox to do so. So we talked about the values of relevance, the value of experience. Those are 2 epistemic values. One of them intuition, the other introverted sensing. We talked about extroverted sensing meaning impact, or getting shit done, or actually doing the thing, execution of a task that's been determined by eventually ideation and resolved by agreement or something, right? Extroverted sensing is that. Extroverted intuition is this, putting words out that either explain things like these are, namely convey information, or express yourself like some of my other videos might be, where I'm just singing something or talking about my subjective shit, what's going on in my life. Now, let's discuss the important question of, extrovert thinking and extrovert feeling. Extrovert thinking is efficiency. It's ordination, really. How to ordinate tasks correctly so that you don't have to go back, undo, and redo stuff by skipping a step or something like that. And so that you can actually maximize your chances of going from goal to outcome. Okay, and then lastly, we've got introvert thinking, introvert feeling. Introvert thinking, fairness, or, they're both deliberation functions, right? It's easier to explain TI because it's just you can give conditional logic problems, and that's essentially the process of TI. It's a process of pinning down meanings that are exclusive of other meanings, parsing out those that are contradictory, and mostly of negating things because they fail to adequately make a case, explain it themselves, what have you, right? The people who are interested in critical thinking and fallacies and scolding people for thinking wrong and stuff, those are TI users projecting that frame of reference. So each of these things, it does have a linkage to both each individual human being and to the totality of human expression, or at least, let's say, adversarial discourse, things that are in dispute. So people right now might be arguing against Donald Trump's behavior, either on FI grounds, which would be legitimate regarding the deportation thing. Put yourself in the shoes of these people who have lived in America for a long time and who have kids who are American citizens. And put yourself in the shoes of that family and what they're going to go through. And then ask yourself, is the positive outcome for the country sufficient to justify these kinds of humanitarian harms? I would say no. But regardless, I'm not here to start any political arguments. People might object to Trump's dismantling of the Department of Education. They might object to some other kind of autocratic shit that Trump's doing by saying he's not respecting checks and balances. Well, what you're really saying there is his SE nature / absolute value is about executing, not about determining. So his deliberation function that he uses, which is the instrumental value, has his own feelings. That's just going to give him his own subjective understanding of what's precious and what's not. And then he's got fourth slot introverted intuition. So that means when he knows with his intuition. But just because intuition is objective in its knowledge, which is to say, it's not predicated on you extrapolating from your own experience, but rather it's your intuition that's about whatever's outside of you now going forward. Well, fourth slot intuition is fourth slot introverted intuition. It's not very nuanced, and especially when paired with a subjective deliberation function, since introverted intuition's knowledge is not something that can be deconstructed. You can't explain exactly how you know holistically that meow is meow, but it nevertheless is the case. For example, I can't explain in a way that wins an argument why Beck is better than the Dave Matthews Band, but it's nevertheless the case. I could give you lots of reasons, but none of them would be convincing because there's no good consensus about what makes something good aesthetically. Simply because of the nature of aesthetics, you have to know it intuitively. You can't determine it or follow some predetermined path. Like when my piano teacher when I was a little kid was trying to make me play scales and read music and play sheet music on the piano in this regimented, ordinated steps. Do this, do that, do this to learn to play the piano with no conceptual framing at all. Like there was never any discussion with me about what you could do with the piano, why you would want to play the piano, what's fun about it or anything like that. It was just, okay, we're going to start with this, hold your hands just like this. And I just hated it, of course. If she had simply said, let me show you a few chords. It's fun. Look, play the C chord, play the F chord. Okay, now try to sing something over that. I'm sure it would have been hooked right away. But I countervalue extroverted thinking. And art is not a place where extroverted thinking works basically at all. So you can't efficiently figure out a heuristic you can follow every time to make good art. It doesn't work that way. Art requires introverted intuition, or at least it validates on introverted intuition. It's the sort of thing you receive from the outside and know about its identity because of what that identity is, rather than because of previous experience you have with it. If you hear a new song and you know it's either good or you know it's bad, well, that's your intuition telling you that, not your experience. Of course, intuition is informed by experience, but the idea is that you're actively, consciously paying attention via one of those modalities, and therefore not actively, consciously paying attention via the other. You can't perceive in two different ways at the same time. You also can't really put and receive at the same time, but if you're putting information like this, then there's a process that takes time of speaking it out, and one can... My ignoring introverted intuition is somewhere in the background cueing me about various aesthetic choices when it comes to making a video like this, or some other kind of video. This is primarily an explanatory video, so I'm not really expecting it to resonate so much on NI, except insofar that it is true, because it's not necessarily very concise, and I don't really have a clear vision of what I'm doing in the video or where I'm going with all of this. The idea, I guess, behind it was, in part, the tyranny of the various functions. What does the tyranny of every function look like? The tyranny of SI, from my perspective, it has a lot to do with, number one, my body requiring me to sleep and eat and stuff, regardless of whether I want to, and my difficulty in keeping any kind of regular sleep schedule. So, like, I knew I had to go to LA today, and I had to get some sleep last night. I took sleeping pills to make sure I did go to sleep, and I did get a good amount of sleep, but it was stressful because my schedule is just, I'm not used to having to work on any kind of schedule really, and it's just the tyranny of SI. But more importantly, the tyranny of SI for me is the metaphysical form of it, namely bad memories that cause me to either have the shame shivers, cringe, feel guilty, etc., which expresses in terms of my vocalizations as I hate myself. But I'm kind of over that at this point. I still obviously do hate myself sometimes, but I've gone past a stretch of time where I was depressed, and I didn't know that I was exactly depressed, but I knew that I hated myself a lot. And after time, I started to kind of try to understand what was happening when I said that, and I determined that I was saying it whether or not I was at fault for something or not. Even if I had a bad memory in which someone got hurt by some third party, not me, I had nothing to do with it, I'd still say I hate myself. So what I realized was, basically, I think that I should be blamed and punished for having sad, negative emotions. And of course, that's ridiculous. We should be as easy on ourselves as possible. You know, what we need to remind ourselves more than anything else is there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with me. We're okay as we are. But the world may or may not be receptive to who you are. So while it's true that each of the configural stacks represents a value configuration of absolute and instrumental values, it's also true that some of those values are more highly valued by society in general, or more highly celebrated than others. Extroverted sensing and extroverted thinking are very much rewarded in the world. You get paid by doing shit and solving problems and figuring shit out, you know? You can potentially make it in the world with extroverted intuition and introverted thinking if you're, say, a lawyer, but it's there are much where lawyers are considered necessary sometimes when you need them, but they're generally considered not productive members of society by society as a whole. I don't agree with that assessment, but that's, people don't like lawyers, right? What about, say, FINE? Well, the world's not going to have a lot of valuing of that because it's going to be a lot of talk and a lot of subjectivity, and maybe talk about objective topics, abstract topics, because that's what extroverted intuition likes to do, maybe. But there's always this element of what's precious that is there before anything else for the INFP. The INFP spends their extroverted intuition on you because they find you precious. Otherwise, they wouldn't spend it on you. Accordingly, I feel very appreciative of Marielle's frequent engagement with me, even though I don't necessarily respond much back. She's my supervisor type. Hopefully she understands. Pause. So I guess the tyranny of extroverted sensing is essentially work that you have to do for the sake of doing work. Busy work, whatever. Paperwork you gotta fill out, stuff like that. Just tasks that don't mean a whole hell of a lot, but that are forced upon you by the expectations of others. And forced upon you as a value. Look, you know, it's really important we get shit done. Hey, enough chalk is cheap. We need to start doing something right now. That's more SE tyranny. Like, what matters is that we do something. It doesn't really matter what we do. Is of course ridiculous. And an extroverted intuitor is going to say, no, we need to talk this thing out before we make any conclusion. The tyranny of introverted intuition it would be seen in something like, let's say, some business hires a new manager and they come in and they trust their intuition about how the world works, but more than the experiences of the people who tried the various things and seen how they actually work. Because intuition is not some sort of magic power that makes you correct about everything. It's just intuition. The tyranny of extroverted thinking is very simple. You are a cog in someone else's machine, and you need to behave accordingly. Your worth is determined by your utility. Now, be useful. You know, I'm a critical parent or 6-slot extrovert thinking, so my urge is to be like, fuck off, utility. And then the tyranny of extroverted feeling is, I experienced it when I had an ESFJ wife, and she was like always policing my Facebook posts and telling me to take the shit down if she thought it was too provocative or controversial or something. And that was definitely pure extroverted feeling. It wasn't like she was engaging on a TI level saying you're wrong, so take it down. The tyranny of introverted thinking is your subjectivities don't matter. This is what only matters is what you can sustain argumentationally. Therefore, I'm correct in telling you to stop having these feelings, wife or girlfriend, because that's not the right way to be. You need to stop using your feelings, okay? We need to use logic when discussing how much we love each other. Now, I started by saying I've been flowing this conversation. Alright, so the tyranny of what else is there? Tyranny of NE is like, okay, so we already reached a decision. Wait, but what about this other thing after you've already talked about shit forever? Never being able to get anything done because you're just yammer. So, those are the tyranny of the functions and my rambling 20-some minute video. Hope you enjoyed it. Love you all. See you later.